Today I want to talk about one of Goethe's most famous early works, The Sorrows of Young Werther. On the surface, it is a tragic love story. Werther is a sincere, sensitive young man who falls deeply in love with a beautiful young woman named Lotte. But Lotte is already engaged to Albert. Reason tells Werther to step away, yet his emotions keep pulling him back. In the end, this impossible love leads him toward a devastating conclusion. What made Werther so powerful was not simply that he loved intensely. It was that his love seemed pure, absolute, and painfully sincere. For readers in Goethe's time, this feeling was deeply moving. Europe was changing rapidly. Society was becoming more commercial, more practical, more disciplined, and more focused on status, career, and usefulness. In that kind of world, Werther appeared almost like a protest from the human heart. He loved nature. He loved beauty. He trusted feeling. He refused to treat life as a calculation. That is why the book became more than a novel. It became a cultural phenomenon. It is said that Napoleon admired this little book very much. Goethe even mentioned in his letters that Napoleon had read it 7 times. Across Germany and much of Europe, the novel created what people later called Werther fever. Young people copied Werther's clothes, his emotional style, and even his way of seeing the world. For many readers, Werther was not just a fictional character. He felt like the voice of their own inner life. His influence also reached the aristocratic world. Noblewomen reportedly carried fans printed with Werther's image. That detail may sound strange today, but it tells us something important. Werther had become a symbol of passionate emotion, tragic beauty, and a soul too intense for the society around him. But if we read The Sorrows of Young Werther only as a story about heartbreak, we miss its deeper meaning. Even the title can mislead us. In English, we usually call it The Sorrows of Young Werther. But the word sorrows does not simply mean teenage sadness or romantic frustration. It points to something much heavier: suffering, spiritual pain, even a kind of inner passion. So this is not really the story of a boy who is sad because love does not work out. It is the story of a young man suffering emotionally, morally, socially, and spiritually. In that sense, we might almost understand the book as the passion of young Werther. Only then can we enter Goethe's world more fully and understand why Werther affected so many people so strongly. So the real questions are these: what kind of story is this? Why would a failed love destroy someone's will to live? Why did Werther's fate echo so loudly across Europe? And beyond love itself, what deeper meaning was Goethe trying to reveal? To answer these questions, we have to return to Werther's world and to the quiet town where his emotional life begins to change. Werther comes from a middle-class background. He is simple-hearted, sensitive, and deeply attached to nature. He leaves the city and moves to a small town called Walheim. There, he finds a world that feels closer to the life he has always wanted. The farmers are plain and honest. The children are innocent. The countryside is calm and beautiful. This place feels like a return to something real. Then one day he is invited to a country dance. On the way, he is asked to pick up a young woman named Lotte. Before he meets her, his companion warns him Lotte is beautiful, but he should not fall too deeply for her because she is already engaged to Albert. At first, Werther does not take this warning seriously. In his imagination, no woman could possibly be so perfect. But the moment he sees Lotte, he realizes the warning was not exaggerated. She is not merely beautiful. There is something pure, warm, and luminous about her. She seems to draw all his attention at once. In Werther's eyes, Lotte is not just a charming young woman. She is almost sacred. His feeling for her is not ordinary desire. Lotte is like a clean piece of music, gentle, bright, intelligent, and full of grace. For Werther, even a small gesture from her seems able to calm all the confusion and pain inside him. From that moment on, the seasons still change. The sun, moon, and stars still move as before. But Werther's world has become completely centered on Lotte. Spring, summer, autumn, winter, morning, evening, day, and night all lose their ordinary meaning. He does not gradually fall in love. He is swept into love almost instantly. After that, Werther begins visiting Lotte's home often. Lotte accepts him as a friend. She welcomes him, cares for him, and gives him warmth. Her trust and affection for her fiancé cut into Werther's heart. So happiness and pain begin to exist together. The closer Werther gets to Lotte, the happier he feels. But the happier he feels, the more clearly he understands that this happiness can never truly belong to him. Still, every day with Lotte feels exciting to him. When he wakes up in the morning and remembers that he can see her again, he feels almost illuminated. For Werther, life no longer needs any other expectation. All happiness has been gathered into one simple fact: he can be near Lotte. Of course, Werther does struggle again and again. He tells himself that he must stop visiting her so often. At night he makes firm resolutions. Tomorrow he will not go. But the next day the thought of Lotte returns. Or he remembers that she casually asked, "You will come tomorrow, won't you?" And immediately his resolution collapses. Soon Albert returns. He has secured a respectable position and comes back into Lotte's life. Before this, Werther could survive inside a vague illusion, but Albert's return makes everything painfully clear. Lotte is not unattached. She belongs to a world in which Werther has no rightful place. What makes the situation even more painful is that Albert is not a villain. In fact, he is calm, reliable, hardworking, decent, and thoughtful. He has no obvious moral flaw. He understands Lotte's world, respects her, and treats Werther with sincere friendship. That is what makes Werther's suffering even worse. His rival is not a bad man. He is a worthy man. The kindness of Lotte and Albert often moves Werther deeply. But the closer the three of them become, the more unbearable his inner conflict becomes. He is surrounded by tenderness, yet he cannot truly possess any part of it. Eventually he decides to leave. He leaves Lotte, leaves Walheim, and tries to escape the life that has made him both happy and miserable. But distance does not free him. Werther takes a public position as a secretary in a courtly setting. He meets people who are kind to him, including a thoughtful nobleman, Count C. For a while there are people who try to comfort and support him. But the new environment does not make life feel wider. Instead, daily work feels small, dull, and lifeless. What Werther hates even more is the hypocrisy of polite society. People obsess over rank, title, reputation, and social position. They are careful, calculating, and always performing. Even dignity seems to depend on appearance. For example, one woman constantly boasts about her noble background and family fortune, even though she is really the daughter of a clerk. To Werther, this world feels suffocating. And the more suffocating it becomes, the more he misses Walheim with its fields, children, and natural simplicity. But what truly breaks him is being away from Lotte. Without Lotte, Werther feels cut off from the source of his life. He no longer knows why he wakes or why he sleeps. His longing grows stronger. His work grows more frustrating. His already sensitive mind becomes increasingly unstable. His superior also becomes dissatisfied with him. Werther cannot tolerate the empty manners and self-important speeches of the upper-class world. He wants to act according to his own feelings, but that only brings him into conflict with the system. Even mild criticism feels like a deep wound. Then, at a gathering held by Count, Werther is humiliated because of his middle-class background. In that moment he understands something more clearly than ever. This society does not accept a person because he is sincere, gifted, or sensitive. It accepts people according to birth, rank, rules, and social order. And those are exactly the things Werther cannot fully believe in. So he resigns and returns to the town where Lotte lives. But when he comes back, the situation is even more painful. Lotte and Albert are now married. Werther's love does not end because of this fact. Instead, because all possibility has vanished, his love becomes even more desperate. Lotte sees his pain and begs him to become calm. But calm is no longer possible for him. Lotte has completely occupied his inner world. Whether his eyes are open or closed, Werther sees Lotte. His longing is no longer ordinary memory. It becomes like an abyss, like an endless sea swallowing his whole being. Gradually, Albert becomes uncomfortable with Werther's continued presence in their married life. Lotte still cares about Werther, but she can no longer save him. So they begin, little by little, to create distance. For Werther, that distance is fatal. He knows Lotte and Albert do not want to hurt him. He also knows they have no other choice, but because he understands this, his despair becomes even deeper. He knows he is becoming a burden. He knows he cannot escape the feeling that has trapped him. Reason is still present, but reason has lost the power to change his fate. At last, Werther's inner world collapses under the weight of suffering. He becomes restless, exhausted, bitter, and hopeless. He cannot live like ordinary people, simply working, adjusting, accepting, and moving on. He cannot find a place for himself in society. Every road seems blocked. Every exit slowly closes. He understands that he is disturbing the peace of Lotte and Albert's life. He also understands that continuing like this will only consume everyone involved, but he cannot free himself, so the story moves toward its tragic ending. Werther says his final goodbye to Lotte, and his life comes to its devastating close. If we place Werther back into literary history, he becomes one of the most typical figures of the German Drang movement. The phrase zu Sturm und Drang is often translated as storm and stress, but its emotional meaning is even stronger. Storm suggests emotional intensity, rebellion, and eruption. Stress or urge suggests longing, pressure, and the deep desire for freedom. Young people influenced by this movement often shared certain traits. They valued intense emotion. They hated artificial social restrictions. They wanted to break stiff rules and let human nature breathe again. They believed that life should not be ruled only by cold reason and formal order. What mattered was vitality, feeling, authenticity, and the force of the soul. Werther is exactly this kind of young man. That is why his suffering is not merely personal. It belongs to an entire generation. So why did such a movement appear in late 18th century Germany? To understand that, we have to look at France. At that time, thinkers like Voltaire and Rousseau had pushed the French Enlightenment to great heights. The atmosphere of political change was growing stronger and stronger. Eventually, in 1789, the French Revolution broke out. The old feudal order was shaken violently. An old world was collapsing, and a new world was approaching. Germany, however, was far behind France. Politically, economically, and culturally, Germany developed more slowly. There was not even a unified German nation. The German-speaking lands were divided into many large and small principalities, often separated by local interests and old structures. In this environment, German youth could see the explosive force of change in France. But in their own world, they still faced dullness, rigidity, and confinement. So the desire to change the world was often transformed first into a desire to change the inner life. That is why German Sturm und Drang was deeply influenced by Rousseau. It admired nature. It valued emotion. It believed that human beings should escape false social constraints and return to a more authentic, complete form of life. Werther became the symbol of this spirit because he concentrates all of it within himself. He is sentimental, refined, artistic, innocent, direct, passionate, and full of an untamed natural quality. His love for Lotte is born inside this atmosphere of nature. Werther is first deeply moved by Lotte not simply because she is beautiful, but because he sees her sharing bread with her younger siblings. That image matters. Lotte, surrounded by children, appears gentle, pure, and alive. The scene becomes a picture of harmony, warmth, and natural goodness. Werther does not simply fall in love with a woman. He falls in love with a vision of nature and goodness itself. The moment that makes him completely surrender to love happens during the thunderstorm at the dance. Thunder and lightning fill the night. The music is almost drowned out by the storm. Werther and Lotte stand near the window. Rain falls on the earth. The air seems awakened by nature itself. Lotte looks at the sky, then at Werther. Tears rise in her eyes. And then she says one name, Klopstock. That single name changes everything. Klopstock was a famous German poet associated with sentimental and religious feeling. When Lotte says his name, Werther immediately understands what is moving inside her. He knows she is thinking of poetry, nature, storm, spring night, sadness, romance, and the trembling of the soul. Most importantly, he realizes that they are feeling the same thing. In that moment, Werther and Lotte are united by a shared emotional language. They are both moved by nature. They both recognize the same poetic world. They both feel the same romantic intensity through one poet's name. So Werther does not love Lotte only as a person. He loves her because she seems capable of sharing his deepest inner life. That is why this love is ideal from the very beginning. It is far beyond an ordinary social relationship. Albert, by contrast, stands for something very different. He is decent, reliable, rational, orderly, and socially responsible. He does not move toward extremes. Werther appreciates Albert's virtues, but he also feels that Albert is too rational, too attached to order, too careful, and not direct enough. Albert, in turn, recognizes Werther's rare qualities, but he also sees that Werther is too easily ruled by emotion and lacks the strength to face reality. So the real conflict between Werther and Albert is not simply two men competing for one woman. It is a conflict between two ways of being. One side represents feeling, nature, intuition, and spiritual freedom. The other represents reason, order, law, and social reality. Albert is not the villain. He represents the values that allow society to function. Werther is not simply wrong, he is a person who cannot find a home within that system. Some readers may assume that if Lotte and Werther share such a deep connection, then Lotte's marriage to Albert must be cold and empty. But that is not true. Lotte and Albert's marriage is genuinely respectable and stable. It fits social expectations, but it is also built on mutual respect and moral compatibility. They come from similar worlds. They are both well educated. They both respect family and marriage. Albert's kindness, steadiness, and moral character can truly give Lotte safety and warmth. Werther, however, is like human nature before it has been reshaped by society. He is wounded, sensitive, spiritual, and hungry for true emotion and inner freedom. Lotte certainly feels the purity and beauty of Werther's soul, but she also accepts the realism, responsibility, and moral structure represented by Albert. So even though she shares a deep spiritual connection with Werther, she cannot betray her husband. This is the deepest source of Werther's suffering. His love for Lotte is natural, pure, and deeply human. But Lotte's marriage to Albert is also legitimate, reasonable, and morally valid. Neither side is false. Neither side is simply wrong. And precisely because both are real, Werther has no way out. He cannot deny his love. He cannot deny the legitimacy of the marriage. So Werther's tragedy is not just a tragic love triangle. It is a symbol of the spiritual crisis of his age. Human thought and feeling had been opened wide, but human behavior and fate were still bound by social rules. The inner life could travel far, reality could not. That is why so many readers in Goethe's time recognized themselves in Werther. He gave visible form to the painful split of an entire generation. The Danish literary critic Georg Brandes once argued that the importance of The Sorrows of Young Werther does not lie only in its unhappy love story. Its real importance is that it expresses the feelings, hopes, and sufferings of an entire age. In Goethe's hands, Werther becomes a symbolic figure. He represents not only himself but the struggle and cry of the modern young soul. From this perspective, Werther's fate is first of all a love tragedy. It is the ending of a love that cannot be fulfilled, but at the same time, it carries a stronger spiritual meaning. It is a collision with the moral order of bourgeois society. Still, we must be careful. Werther is not a simple rebel. He does not truly try to destroy Lotte and Albert's marriage. He does not try to take Lotte away by force. On the contrary, his suffering is so intense precisely because he recognizes the legitimacy of that marriage. He does not want to ruin their life. He does not want his love to become an act of violence. Near the end, he even asks Albert for forgiveness for the disturbance he has brought into their home. So Werther is not someone who denies order. He is someone who acknowledges order, yet is crushed by it. When Goethe shaped Werther's ending, he drew partly from the real story of a young man named Jerusalem, who had been destroyed by an impossible love. Goethe studied the records of that case, but he did not simply copy reality. Instead, Goethe placed Werther's final night on December 23rd, the night before Christmas Eve. That timing is not accidental. It gives the novel an unmistakable religious layer. Goethe seems to connect Werther's suffering with the idea of sacred suffering. Werther's letters include echoes of Christ's final cry. His final decision also carries a kind of sacrificial calm. Other details, such as bread and wine, further lift Werther's personal tragedy into the realm of religious symbolism. Through these echoes, Goethe gives Werther a kind of spiritual dignity. Before Goethe, German literature usually reserved sacred suffering for gods, nobles, saints, or heroes. But Goethe allows an ordinary middle-class young man to occupy a position of tragic seriousness. This is important. It means that human emotion, human pain, and the human soul deserve a new kind of dignity. Of course, from a Christian ethical point of view, choosing death in this way is a grave violation, because life is understood as something given by God. That is why Werther cannot receive full religious peace after death. But this is exactly where Goethe's question becomes sharp. If a human life has been pushed into total despair, if love and existence seem to offer no path forward, does the individual still have the right to decide his own ending? This is one of the most difficult questions the novel raises. The Enlightenment and Twinsturm Undrang both emphasized freedom, human dignity, and individual will. But what happens when those ideas are pushed to their extreme? Can they come into conflict with religious order? Werther's tragedy is not only the tragedy of one person, it is also the tragedy of modern freedom colliding violently with an older sacred world. Werther's fate also carries religious meaning because he himself does not see death as pure nothingness. For him, death seems like an escape from the limits of reality and a movement toward another world where reunion might still be imagined. In that sense, Werther's destruction is not only an ending, it also carries a fantasy of eternity, resurrection, and meeting again. So in Werther we see secular and religious forces intertwined. He lives in the real world, but his suffering is written with an almost sacred glow. He is shaped by religious imagination, yet what drives him toward the extreme is one of the most human and earthly forces of all: love. Goethe's greatness lies in the fact that he does not simply oppose these two forces, he allows them both to exist within Werther. That is why human nature in this novel is both beautiful and doomed to suffer. It is sensitive, passionate, pure, and full of longing. But precisely because of that, it clashes more violently with cold social order. Perhaps this is the image of the human being that Goethe wanted to create, a creature always reaching toward the infinite, yet always pulled back into the limits of reality. Werther's tragedy is what happens when this human condition is pushed to its breaking point. Goethe once wrote a deeply meaningful line: "What is man, this praised half-god? Is he not lacking strength exactly when he needs it most? When he rises in joy and sinks in pain, when he approaches the infinite and longs to merge with it? Is he not always defeated again and brought back to dull, cold consciousness?" In the end, Werther is more than a man destroyed by impossible love. He is a soul reaching for beauty, freedom, and meaning, but crushed by the limits of reality. That is why his story still hurts. He is Goethe's most tragic answer to what happens when a sensitive heart asks too much from the world.